We are recording today at the request of a number of different folks who are on summer vacation. So thanks so much to our speakers who have consented as such. And we'll make sure that we send out the link where this is posted in case there are folks you'd like to share today's conversation with. My name is Michelle Oshman. For those of you I may not have met, and if this is your first time joining one of our coffee chats, we absolutely welcome you to the community and we're thrilled to have you here. So today, for our coffee chats, we talk about different policy issues that are pertinent to the patient community, certainly to our community in biotech, but also where that nexus is. And so we welcome patient advocacy organizations, stakeholders, as well as our industry partners, the Alliance Development Professionals that you all work with from the companies to these calls. So hope you'll find a way to also make this a networking opportunity. Feel free to connect with folks within the chat. And also as far as sort of connecting back with any of us, feel free to reach out to myself, Jet, or Jesse on the team. So we'll go ahead and get started. So, and if you are new and you'd like to share your contact information in the chat, please feel free to do so. We like to start off our calls by welcoming a new CEO to the community, since we are all advocates at heart, and it's great to get to know new leaders in the community. I know, Danielle, that you're not necessarily new to the community, but you have a new job in the C-suite. You are now the president and CEO of the Assistance Fund after having been the COO for 7 years. So we'd love to hear about you and some of your goals for the year.
Thank you so much, Michelle, for the introduction and for inviting me to join today's coffee chat. Good morning, everyone. As Michelle said, my name is Danielle Viscaino, and I am the new president and CEO of the Assistance Fund, also referred to as TAF. I have over 15 years of healthcare experience, 7 of which have been in executive leadership in the charitable patient assistance space. In a past life, I was a scientist at the Bureau of Public Health Laboratories, mainly focused on Mycobacterium. For those who are unfamiliar with TAF, we are an independent nonprofit organization that helps people with high out-of-pocket medical costs by providing financial assistance for their co-payments, co-insurance, deductibles, or other health-related expenses. Since TAF was founded in 2009, we have helped nearly 180,000 patients, children, and adults access the treatment they need to manage a life-threatening chronic or rare disease. We manage currently over 80 disease programs, more than half of which are focused on rare diseases. We cover all the FDA-approved treatments that treat the diseases named in each program. After patients receive a diagnosis, they will contact us for help to apply for assistance with the cost of their treatment or other health-related services. Since joining TAF in 2016, I have been so humbled by the impact we make every single day across an ever-increasing number of rare diseases and ultimately more patients. I've been lucky to have seen this impact up close while leading operations at TAF. As Michelle said, I've been with the organization for 7 years, and now I'm incredibly honored to be and excited to be at the helm as president and CEO. My goal is to do everything to achieve TAF's mission and vision of seeing the day when no person goes without treatment because of an inability to pay. I truly thank you again for the opportunity to join today's coffee chat. The agenda really looks fascinating, and I'm so sorry that I won't be able to stay for the rest of the call, but I encourage everyone here who may be interested in opportunities to partner with TAF and collaborate is to reach out to Stephanie Marshall, who was on the call, TAF's Director of Patient Advocacy, and we will share her contact information at the end of the call. Thank you so much again, Michelle, for inviting me.
Thanks and welcome. We're so happy to have you here. Okay, so now let's dig into the conversation at hand. Today we're chatting with leaders from the rare disease community, and we are talking about the implications, certainly of the Inflation Reduction Act, but a number of other policies as well that are important to the community. You all are movers and shakers in Washington and really the voice of the patient, so we're really honored to have you here. We have 3 excellent panelists today, Dr. Karen Heltzer, who is the Director of Policy and Regulatory Affairs at NORD. Her biographical sketch is much too long to read, so we have posted a document in the chat for folks to be able to look up our esteemed speakers. Annie Kennedy, who is the Chief of Policy, Advocacy, and Patient Engagement at the EveryLife Foundation. And last but certainly not least, somebody that I had considered a mentor and a friend for decades, I won't say how many, is Amy Rick. So Amy is the principal at Levitt Partners and most recently served as the president and CEO of the Food and Drug Law Institute. And I think most of us got to know you, Amy, when you were CEO of Parkinson's Action Network, which was a fantastic advocacy coalition, really working with 5 different Parkinson's organizations and really coalescing and leading that advocacy. So welcome to all 3 of you. And again, your biographies are in the chat. Before we get too deep into the weeds, let's level set a little bit about the IRA and how it relates to the orphan drug community. So Annie, I'll kind of lead off with you to share your perspective there.
Sure. So first of all, thank you so much, Michelle, for highlighting our rare disease community priorities on behalf of all of us. And I'm thrilled to be here with Karen and Amy. So just a quick IRA level set from the perspective of the rare disease community. I think we'd be remiss to, first of all, not say that from our community's perspective, the IRA was a landmark piece of legislation for all patient communities, and overall lower out-of-pocket costs, enabling smoothing and predictability for costs is always a good thing for patients. So most elements of the IRA were beneficial. However, what we want to focus on for this conversation and what we are focusing on when we're thinking about our advocacy efforts is specific to the orphan drug exemption. And the orphan drug exemption has really been very harmful to orphan product development for our communities. And it's something that I think many, even those within Congress, probably didn't realize the impact that just a couple letters, a few words in the provisions within the orphan product exemption we're going to have on our ecosystem, and more importantly, on the patient communities who had been working so hard to build the incentives for therapeutic development in rare disease. So I'll just provide a little bit of an overview, and then I know Karen and Amy and I can all dig into it just a little bit more. So very specifically, the language that we're talking about is very simply verbiage that says that an orphan product exemption, so within the requirements for exemptions for when therapies would be considered eligible for consideration, the orphan drug exemption is that products would be designated for only one rare disease or condition, and for which only one approved indication or indications is for such disease or condition. So for a very long time, we were very focused on the fact that orphan products were exempt from negotiation if they're only approved for use in one rare disease. But what happened is there were a couple words in that sentence. There was the focus on the term designated, and then the focus on the one disease or condition. So we can dig into that a little bit and what that means in this discussion. But we also need to talk about that there were 2 different timelines also for small and large molecule drugs for when they could begin price negotiations following approval. And those 2 different timelines have also created an inequity and shifted the focus from science helping determine decisions for innovators to whether or not products can be open for negotiation according to within the small molecule space, that's 9 years. And for not a large molecules, it's 13 years. So these are the issues that we're really grappling with in the rare disease community, that we've been really trying to work on some of the opportunities for fixes to this language. And just to put a little bit more context, do you want me to dig into some of the implications for that now, Michelle, or do you want to maybe shift?
I think it's fine. Go ahead and go into the implications a little bit, and I'll be interested in everybody's perspective on that as well.
Okay, so maybe I'll start and then others can add context because we have a lot of experts here with us. So one of the first things we were concerned about is that a metric based on a number of, well, I'll start with approvals because that's where we thought we were starting, does not actually correlate at all to how a drug may be addressing unmet need in a rare disease community based on a population of size, who the population was approved for, what the need was in the community. And we're very concerned that this disincentivizes smaller populations of communities being served. We are also very concerned that despite the fact that repurposing is really the best hope for patients to receive products in their lifetime, for products to be approved in the lifetime of those living with rare diseases today, that incentives are being lost for this. Now, to focus on this term orphan designation, and I think we'll have Amy maybe talk a little bit more about this. An orphan designation, for those who don't work in this space right now, is obtained very early in the process. And FDA actually just published a paper around the list of orphan designations and does not correlate to the number of orphan approvals. So this is a process where FDA applies an orphan designation when there's a concept of a product, a vision of a product being able to be applied in a rare disease. What CMS has confirmed is that applying for an orphan designation will impact whether or not a company will be able to be exempt from the exclusion. We feel very strongly that the number of designations should have no bearing on a drug's exclusion under the orphan exclusion. Orphan designations and orphan approvals are very different from one another, and that this clarification is necessary in order to maintain the incentives in the rare disease space. And so that's something we can dig into further. And then the third thing I'll just flag is that science is moving towards more focus on platform approaches. And we're seeing this within even the investments within our federal government partners. And that we really need to be working towards discovering new uses for existing treatments and incentivizing this momentum. And we're really worried about the implications for this provision and enabling that. So I'll leave it there for others to tag in if they want to around the IRA.
Sure. Thank you so much, Annie. And I know this is something that was really confusing for a lot of us is FDA's nomenclature, or I mean, they set the definitions around designation and indication. There seemed to be some confusion in their interpretation as to how CMS articulated sort of their guidance or their final rule. So Amy and Karen, I'd be interested from your perspective, how do we cut through that and simplify how it's worked to date?
I mean, I can start, especially in terms of the vocabulary. I think I'll only speak for myself. For decades, I have used indication and disease interchangeably, or often interchangeably. And for this purpose, they are not interchangeable at all. As Annie already said, the designation correlates to a whole disease state. And then, as we all know, a drug can get approved for a subset of the population. And so then it's the second designation of a disease under CMS rule that would kick a drug out of exemption. I think the confusion comes as much because also people use the term exclusivity interchangeably with exemption for the IRA price negotiation, but it's not exclusivity. That's the Orphan Drug Act. So it's really a linguistical mess, I'd say. But otherwise, I have to say I just agree with everything Annie said. I think CMS is using the right language. They're using the FDA language, but it's so confusing because I think many of us, unless you were immersed in the rare disease space, which many of you are, had not really focused on the trigger moment of designation under the Orphan Drug Act, which of course is what triggers all the research benefits that a company will get. Under the Orphan Drug Act, you get a 25% research and development tax credit if you've been designated as rare disease. And so we hadn't really focused on designation. And so I agree with everything Annie said, but I agree that this may have been, at least in some people's minds, unintentional. Because of the distinction between designation and approval. And just to add, the vast majority of potential therapies that are designated under the Orphan Drug Act never come to approval. But that research is still key for understanding A, what this drug doesn't work for, just as important, right? And B, adding to the pool of knowledge for different rare diseases. So it's unfortunate if they don't come to approval, but that pool of research and knowledge is just huge. Anna, you know this better than I do, but I think for Duchenne muscular dystrophy, I think my numbers are right. They're very close. There have been 73 designations historically and 6 approvals. But much of that research is there. Most of those designations have not been withdrawn. So
Correct.
Real research happened. So is that what you wanted me to key in on, Michelle?
Yeah, that's really helpful. I'd like to turn to Karen, and hopefully we've got her mic working now, to talk a little bit about the perspective that she brings. Oh, it's not working. Well, how about if we'll keep moving a little bit, and then Karen, as soon as it seems to be working, just feel free to weigh in, and Jet and Jesse will work with you to kind of move things forward. I know one of the things that, and I hope I articulate this accurately, Karen will raise her hand and say if you got it wrong if I did. But I know one of the points that NORD had made in their comments leading into the most recent CMS document that came out was the concern that if an indication is open, if you apply for the indication, you get that, designation early, and let's say you have a drug that's approved, it is exempt from being price set by the government, but you say, gee, to the point others have made, the repurposing is really important here. And we heard that from Dr. Feigenbaum yesterday, is really passionate advocate who is also a physician who spoke at the EveryLife briefing yesterday, the RDLA briefing, that once you've applied for and gotten that orphan designation, that it was unclear if you then had lost your exemption, right? It was were you subject to negotiation just because you've opened another designation, which may not result in an approval.
I will say CMS has clarified that. So CMS clarified that and really doubled down. And I would say from our perspective in the rare community, it really went from almost bad to worse and what we really need to be working on. And Karen, I don't know if you can chime in here, so I don't want to be, but and have clarified that it's the time of the second designation, which is very concerning to us because, as Amy just said, the designation is just FDA signaling to the company that yes, indeed, this is sort of a creative space and rare to be working in, that it is not an approval. And it, in our mind, and we are very.
So I'm hoping you can hear me.
Yes.
Yes. Excellent. And I think
Fantastic.
Annie
My
froze for me. Go ahead.
My apologies for the early morning technical challenges. I agree with pretty much everything that's been said. I think from our perspective at NORD, so we've spent a lot of time over the last 3, 4, 5 months educating CMS on FDA Law 101. I completely agree that the designation versus indication issue is very confusing, and there are minute details around just the general confusion, as well as what constitutes one disease as opposed to multiple diseases. Do multiple indications fall within the same designation? So we spend a lot of time educating CMS on it. And I think just looking through the final guidance, I think they get it now. They understand. The problem is that they feel very much bound by statute. And as you can imagine, educating lawmakers on the Hill has been another big challenge. I think from our perspective, our biggest concern is that, in particular for smaller biotech companies that are really relying on designations, not just to unlock the vital Orphan Drug Act incentives, but also to attract funders and to really signal to the investors that they have a product that is promising to come to market, that they will be disincentivized from using the Orphan Drug Act incentives. And we're really worried about these pipeline decisions that are years down the line, but really making it much less likely to further develop a product for additional diseases. As I think Amy said, there are, I think, 6,000 designations for orphan drugs that are currently active, and only 1,000, a little bit more than 1,000 approved indications. So you see just the odds of a designation coming to full approval are slim, and we don't want to lose that early research.
So I think one of the sort of poignant conversations that you had yesterday, Annie, and during the briefing that you all had, I'd love to get a download of the briefing, but also that, the gentleman, David Gerzik, who is Chandler's dad, talked about, my son has a single misprint in his genetic code, right? And he correlated that in a very articulate and eloquent way that I will not attempt to replicate, that really there's a single word almost within a section of the guidance that, certainly the word "and," but then also these interpretations that really, will be, could be devastating to the rare community. So for those who may not have been part of that briefing, could you just give us a kind of a synopsis of some of the certainly the family stories or the individuals, just to put a personal spin on what this means for folks?
Sure. So we held, there was a Congressional Rare Disease Caucus briefing yesterday, and, it was not really just about the impact of the IRA. It was really about that we're concerned that there are smaller rare disease communities increasingly getting left behind because of the changing incentives in rare disease. But it's hard to talk about that and not be talking about some of the impact that we're already seeing, which I think is really underscores how big a deal this is. And one of the conversations we had, one of the questions I asked some of the panelists was, how are considerations being made differently today in July of 2023 than they were made in July of 2022? And we had really just a phenomenal panel. We were so grateful that people were able to travel to be there, but we had a panel comprised of a CEO from a company that's working in some very small pipelines, but he's had a history of working in other rare spaces and is very familiar with how these incentives work. We had a physician who actually leads many different initiatives and organizations, but he himself, Dr. David Feigenbaum, who he himself discovered the cure for his own disease, Castleman's disease. And the CEO I referenced was Dr. Ed Kaye, who many people know. We have the father that you spoke about, who is a professor at a business school here in the area and is the dad of a young boy who has Angelman syndrome, and spoke about how the Angelman community is a community that is at risk of losing opportunity because they were counting on the pipelines ahead of them working out, and then they would be the next. And so what they're watching is potentially things withering on the vine ahead of them. And they're worried that then they won't benefit from the therapies ahead of them because companies will have to make hard choices. And we're seeing that already happen, which was really compelling. We had Josh Trent, who is a colleague of Amy's and many of ours, do a really wonderful job providing a synopsis of what this means through the lens of rare. And then we invited Dr. Charles Cho, who is a neuromuscular physician in Stanford and is with Palo Alto Investors, to talk about what this looks like from the investment perspective, and also as a provider who works in a neuromuscular clinic and in an ALS clinic, and how the investment space is changing and shifting a little bit, because they're looking at how you de-risk those investments and what that looks like, especially when you think about the smaller rare disease populations. But from the patient community, just coming back to that, the rare disease community, what works beautifully about the rare disease community is the communities benefit from one another. We stand on one another's shoulders, and it's oftentimes pipelines are built upon pipelines upon pipelines. And we have so many examples and models that we can point to. And what we are really not just worried about, what we are seeing happen right now is that it's those next therapies that now cannot happen, will not happen. Companies are having to make very hard choices. And some of that we will never know about, because those are choices that are now going to be made very early stage. If it is not even at the time of an approval that you will lose that eligibility or that exemption, but it's the time of the next designation. So as Karen referenced, there were 6,000 designations, 1,100 approvals. Are you even going to go to talk to FDA about your creative idea and your designation for fear of what you could lose? And you're going to have to think about which communities you're going to work in. And so we work in a space where we have very philanthropic investors and developers who really are thinking about which companies can benefit next, or which communities could benefit next, to get work very hard on understanding the symptomology of the diseases. And we just worry about who's just not going to benefit now from these pipelines and this innovation. So we really do need to work on solutions very quickly. We need to think creatively about this, and we need to come together around this. And Karen, I hope it's okay if I can share now with everybody that this is something I know many of us are working together on these issues and thinking about how we come together on this. But this is something that is so important to our communities that NORD and EveryLife are talking together about, even how we could be working together on forward-facing conversations with CMS and Congress and others, pulling together with other coalitions that are forming. So this matters so much to the rare community that we have to come together around this.
And
And
if I
it
can
can
just,
Oh, go ahead, Karen, sorry.
and if I can just piggyback, I was on another panel yesterday talking about the Inflation Reduction Act implementation. And as Annie said, what we really worry about are the pipeline decisions that are not public and that are hard to talk about. And a lot of the discussion on the panel yesterday was about some of the few companies and some of the few decisions that have been made public already, and kind of the complication of trying to communicate about this to the patient community, to the investor community, and more broadly, and just the challenges of trying to be public about these decisions that are usually not made, that are usually not very public. So as we think about, as Annie said, next steps to try to build the momentum to change the law, which we know is a high bar, just given all the concerns around opening up the Inflation Reduction Act. I think as we think through that, we have to think about how we can tell the story, both what it means to our patients, the diseases that will not have a cure because of the Inflation Reduction Act, but also these pipeline decisions that are difficult to talk about for investors, for small companies, for the patients that are impacted. So I really see this as one of the areas where, in order to make progress, industry and pharma groups and patient groups have to work together really closely to tell the complete story.
I totally agree with that, Karen. If I can just tag in, I was at DIA, I was on a panel there about this and spoke about it. And after the panel, 3 different individuals from 3 different companies came up and shared with me that they have just made decisions. But people aren't talking about it publicly, which I understand these are hard decisions to share, but we have to be thinking about even if there's a de-identified way to start to share about it. Or if we even share it through the lens of which patient communities are, and we have to think about a way to be sharing these stories and not just after the session ends, because that's the only way we're going to actually, it's hard to share the negative and talk about what's not happening. That's how, though, we will get the underscore and the importance of this to get a solution.
Yeah, and the complexity, obviously, of being, disclosing market moving activities, but to your point, I think the identification or some way of sharing some of that is important. Sorry, Amy, go ahead.
That's okay. I think that's a great idea, Annie. Just a couple additional points. I got a question in the chat directed to me. How many companies are we actually talking about here, or drugs? Because the companies we just discussed, it's hard to know what the pipelines are. That's also hard to figure, can be hard to pin down, because you may not know what's going to be generic, that kind of thing. But the estimates, I've seen 2 estimates for 2021 price data and 2020 price data, and it appears to be between 3 and 5 drugs that might be affected by this. But I want to make sure people understand, which I'm sure all of you do, that the way the IRA is set up, and there'll be 10 drugs in the first year and I guess 15 in the second year. If a drug is exempt from negotiation, it's still 10, just the next one moves up. And so it's still a high priced drug. And if a drug is on the potential for negotiation list, and it's a rare drug, it may be a very, very expensive drug. And one of the scenarios that I worry about is with this new rule now in the IRA, the disincentive for a second designation, let's say in an ultra rare disease, because you would lose your exemption, and that's a population that really needs additional research to drive home how much this is a research question and not a drug pricing question. I had an offline conversation, long conversation with someone, not about this, but this came up at NCATS yesterday because it was offline. I won't call them out. They're worried about this. NIH is worried about this because this is a research, huge implications for research for rare diseases. And there aren't that many issues that are CMS, FDA that NIH is worked up about. That shows you the A to Z impact of this provision. So I thought that was interesting. Michelle, just a few points, that was it that I wanted to chat.
Well, so I'd love to chat about sort of the, oh, sorry, Karen.
Just one more issue that I just want to make sure everybody understands is with the timing issue, that as soon as a drug loses its exclusion from the orphan drug provision, that the clock starts from the original approval, as opposed to when that second disease approval occurred. What the other big concern that we're worried about is many drugs come to market first as orphan drugs, even though they can treat a variety of orphan and non-orphan diseases. And we are worried that now the incentive to first bring the product to market as an orphan drug will fall away, and that therefore the orphan products, the orphan designations then, because they tend to be less productive and less lucrative, that they ultimately will never make it to market. So the thing that is got to make sure that we're all also concerned about is when the clock really starts ticking once the product loses its exclusion from negotiation.
An important point, definitely. I want to get into some of the solutions and ideas and have Amy talk about some work she's leading, but just a couple of things I wanted to give you all a chance to talk about some of the other policy implications, not necessarily of the IRA, but I know there are other policies that are really important to the community. And I'd like to chat a little bit about those. And Annie, I think you referenced this earlier about the incentives and in particular, issues like the orphan drug tax credit erosion. I just wondered if you had perspectives there. Cameron's Law, I know, is intended to ameliorate that, but do you all have a perspective on that?
Yeah, so we lead the Community Congress, which many people who are on the chat here this morning are a part of, and each of our Community Congress partners prioritize legislation that we will work on either in a process of leading, engaging, supporting, or monitoring. And this year, all of our partners really work to prioritize the increase of incentives in orphan product development. And one of the bills that has been introduced in the House is Cameron's Law, and that's in our support category right now. And that grid is publicly available if people want to see. There are a lot of bills and a lot of legislation of importance to the rare community right now. Cameron's Law is HR 1350 and was represented by Representatives Gottheimer and Bacon. And essentially, as many here know, that in 2017, the orphan drug tax credit was reduced as a part of the tax reform bill from 50% to 25%. So we've already seen incentives in rare disease product development impacted pretty significantly. And what Cameron's Law would do would be increase the orphan drug tax credit or restore it back to the level of 50%. And then it also includes a CDC feasibility study looking at the feasibility of expanding the ability to track epidemiology of rare diseases. So that's what Cameron's Law is. And right now that's in our support category for our community.
Karen, what about for NORD?
On the north side, there are a couple of things I just wanted to flag because they're really timely and more on making sure that our patients have timely access to the therapies that they need. One is Accelerating Kids Access to Care Act that basically makes it easier for children that are on CHIP or Medicaid to see providers that are outside of their home state. We know many of our patients, in particular children, have to travel across state lines to see specialists, and both for the provider and the patient, the amount of paperwork that's associated with that is just overwhelming. So the Accelerating Kids Access to Care Act would make that a lot easier while still maintaining the state Medicaid's ability to determine what services are covered and not really weighing in on whether a certain treatment is appropriate or not, but just making it easier to get the patient connected to the care that they need. The bill was introduced in the last Congress, unfortunately didn't make it. It should be reintroduced this week. NORD has been working with the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society, circulating a letter that I know many in the patient community have signed on to. We had more than 215 organizations sign on, and we've been quite extensively engaged with Congress to ensure that we have robust co-sponsorship on both the House and the Senate side. And we still expect this legislation to be introduced this week. So quite excited about that. I also wanted to flag, because it will be marked up this morning, there is a telehealth benefit expansion for Workers Act, which is HR 824, which sounds great. We obviously are big supporters of telehealth access. Many of our patients have to travel many miles. According to a 2019 study we did, about 40% of our patients travel 60 miles or more on a regular basis to see the care that they need. But we worry that this particular bill would, rather than provide integrated healthcare benefits that include telehealth, make it harder for patients to then, after a telehealth visit, be able to see inpatient care, in-person care. And so we are really worried that this ultimately would lead to a reduction in the access to robust and comprehensive healthcare. So we've been, again, quite active over the last several weeks, trying to educate potential sponsors about the negative implications for the rare disease community. And again, we expect that this legislation will be marked up this morning. So I know my colleagues are going to be watching starting in about 10 minutes here. And then just the last thing to flag, NORD has been working to increase Rare Disease Advisory Council since 2022. we want to make sure that every state has a strong and robust RDAC, because they really give rare disease patients a voice at state capitals, and they're really important in helping to shape state legislation on anything like biomarkers and access challenges and all the things that we see regularly on the state side. We are now up to 26 states that have functioning RDACs and a number more that have pending legislation and active coalitions trying to bring RDACs to life. And in association with our annual summit in October, we, for the first time, are able to bring the leaders of all the RDACs together to share best practices. There's a lot of variability in how RDACs are set up, how they function, and there's tremendous benefit for the community to come together and kind of learn from each other. So the meeting will be on October 15th for a half day. We're really excited to be able to do this. And our RDAC leaders will be able to participate in summit afterwards. We'll have a great session that will talk about RDACs and how RDACs can really help with state policy. So we're really excited about that. And with that, I think I'm giving it back to you, Michelle.
Sure. Yeah, thanks so much. And the RDAC project is something that Patrick Clues, who is our BIOS Vice President for State Government Affairs, has worked really closely with the NORD team on. The Maryland RDAC at the moment is taking applications for RDAC panel slots. So and NORD has been helpful in getting the word out on that. So now let's turn to Amy and talk a little bit about the coalition or the task force that you're leading. I don't want to call it a coalition. I want to and just kind of talk about the work that you're doing and how that's coming together.
I know I'm muted. Thanks, Michelle. Just a quick introduction to Levitt Partners, in case some of you don't know. Levitt Partners is a health policy organization in DC, founded by Mike Levitt, former Secretary of HHS, focuses exclusively on health policy, and a vast majority of its work is alliances and coalitions and task force around health policy. Some of you I know are part of the very active sickle cell disease group, and some of you I think were also part of the neurological working table that was very active in 2021 and 2022. And I think many of you know some of my colleagues, Clay Alsbach, Sarah Singleton, or Josh Trent, who Annie already mentioned. So just that's a quick, that's who Levitt is if you're not familiar. We are forming another group, Michelle. We are not calling it a alliance or a coalition, very specifically because it is focused exclusively on the Orphan Drug Act provision of the IRA. There are other aspects of the IRA, certainly, that many patient groups are supportive of, and some other aspects, there are other issues that still need to be addressed and honed in on so that there aren't any unintended negative consequences. But the group that we are heavily in the throes of pulling together now is 100% about the Orphan Drug Act exemption, and really focused on protecting the Orphan Drug Act and making sure that all the provisions, cutting the tax credit aside in 2017, the Orphan Drug Act provisions in the original Orphan Drug Act to incentivize research and ongoing research for rare diseases are protected. We have 6 funding companies: Alexion, AstraZeneca, UCB, Takeda, Daiichi, and Alnylam. And we are actively recruiting patient organizations to join us. We've had many serious conversations with many organizations. Some of you are on the call now, including, of course, NORD and EveryLife and our good colleagues there. The most important aspect of this for us is the unified message. All of us have mentioned many times in this meeting how complicated this issue is, and it's even the problem that's complicated. The solutions are complicated too. And so it's always important to have a unified message when you're trying to fix something in a regulatory, or more likely in this case, it's a legislative fix. But in this case in particular, because it's so language specific, and it's so, there really are different spots along the timeline where we could draw a line, and it's the last thing we want to do is fail to get our correction because we had too many subtle differences in our requests and our approach to fixing this, which absolutely has to happen. So that's really, we're, as said, we're in the middle, heavily in the middle of working with patient organizations right now. This is very much intended to be a task force, a group that is led by itself. So we have not focused on the exact details of a proposed solution yet, because that has to come from the community of the task force, very much, which we hope to be about 80% patient groups. And I'm happy to answer any questions about it. Anyone who's interested in learning more about the task force is free to reach out to me. I can put my email in the chat, but Michelle for decades has known how to reach me, and that's been my pleasure. So I'm happy to answer any questions. Michelle, did I leave anything out that?
No, we were embryonic when we first met. So
Yeah, that's right.
the decades are, explained in that way. Annie, I know you put some things in the chat about Rare Across America, which is important. You're showing up as Danielle, at least on my end, but it is you.
It is me.
It is you. So yeah, so you, first of all, thank you, Amy. I think that this is what you're doing is really exciting, bringing both together. Bio is very interested in participating as well, and is very supportive of, in any way that we can bring more patient voice in, and encourage really all of you to come to the table. I think it's important to do so. That there is no, it's not a financial requirement or anything for a nonprofit
I should have said that.
So,
yeah.
But just so you know, so Annie, a couple of things. I'd love for you to talk about Rare Across America. I think it's timely because you all have this cool program with when members are back in their home states during the August recess, which we hope we actually have an August recess, to connect with members, and you build that opportunity for advocates. So if you don't mind talking a little bit about that, and I know there's a burden study that you wanted to mention as well.
Yeah, so our policy pillars, we work, across the spectrum of rare diseases, from diagnostics and newborn screening, through regulatory issues, which we've spoken a lot about here, through access. And we do 3 big advocacy pushes throughout the year through our RDLA program. One is Rare Disease Week, where advocates come to the Hill in Washington. One, we did a Youth Hill Day in June, which were teens and young adults, which was super cool. And then the third is our Rare Across America program, which are in-district lobby days, which will be August 7th through 18th. We have over 600 members of the rare disease community registered. The Senate meetings will be virtual and the House meetings will be in person. And our community, we have a advisory committee of patient community members that prioritize what the ask will be. And the asks are reflective of access community priorities, which really speak to where the community is focused right now. I dropped a link in so you can see more information about that. The ask will be to join the Congressional Rare Disease Caucus, which is terrific. And then 2 bills. One is the Help Copays Act, which is led by the All Copays Count Coalition, which is HR 830 and S 1375. And then the Safe Step Act, which is HR 2630 and S 652. And you can find more information on our website or the respective websites of the coalitions leading those bills. And then just real quick, because I know we're almost at time, I just wanted to, first of all, thank you to those who came and our partners who helped share in a reception last night on the Hill around diagnostics, which is an issue near and dear to many of our hearts, I know, but especially incredibly important and rare. But we partnered with the National Society for Genetic Counselors, the Precision Medicine Coalition, and Alexian last night to host a reception on the Hill and highlight a number of pieces of legislation in those spaces. And just wanted to flag that we have a study coming out that follows on the National Economic Burden of Rare Disease study that we had published in 2022. And in that study, as we know, we found that the economic impact of living with a rare disease in 2019 was close to $1 trillion. The direct costs of that were about 40%. The costs to society and individuals was about 60%. But in the survey that we had conducted, we found that the mean diagnostic odyssey for those who responded to the survey was over 6 years and included 17 providers. So we've conducted a follow-on study to look at what the cost of delayed diagnosis is in rare disease and what the economic impact of earlier intervention is. And we will be publishing those findings in September to really help underscore the policy efforts related to diagnostics, newborn screening, and earlier intervention. So I just wanted to flag that that's all coming out very soon, and thank everybody who's been supporting those efforts, because that, again, has been a really broad community effort.
Excellent. So for folks in the audience, if anyone has questions, feel free to please post your question in the chat or raise your hand or just come off mute and weigh in if you have anything you'd like to ask any of the panelists. Everyone gets shy in the beginning, and then I have to go to my backup question, but I think I've already asked my backup question, so. There we go.
Hi there, Jeff Worth with Harmony Bio. I put it in the chat as well, but thank you, Michelle, for a nice discussion, and Annie, 2 great events yesterday. I know with the Orphan Drug Act 40th, there's been some activity around shoring that up. Cameron's Law, the Rare Disease Company Coalition represents 23 rare companies. We're very supportive of Cameron's, which would affect the tax credit. We're also working on a bill that would deal with pandemic disruption of clinical trials, which we found to be a very serious issue. We'd love it if both Bio, EveryLife, and Nord took a closer look at LEOs as well. We're meeting with members of Congress on that this week, and have been for a while. This is the second Congress. It's also Gottheimer and Bacon, who are the lead co-sponsors.
Great. I don't know that we've taken a real good look at that. I mean, maybe Jamie has, but if you can just send that over again. Thanks for flagging that, Jeff.
Will do. Thanks, Annie.
Same here. I know we've been following it, but if you wouldn't mind sending it again, it was reintroduced. Happy to lend our support to the extent that we can.
So Emma Andelson, you work with a lot of small state organizations in sickle cell disease. So for the experts, many of these organizations are getting up to speed on more complex drug development topics. Do you 3 have suggestions on good ways for them to learn and join conversations regardless of their location?
Yes. I would just say that one of the, if there were good things that came in the pandemic, which is always a hard thing to say out loud, is that we learned the benefits of being virtual. And even though we are back in person for many things, everything we do in person has a virtual component. And so, and we care very deeply about meaningful connections virtually. And so for groups that, and for those who are not traveling in or unable to travel, there are always virtual components to all of our engagements. And as we just said, for some of our engagements, they're back in local communities. We have events throughout the US. And I would encourage everyone to be connected to all of our groups and all of our websites and all of our chats and participating in our webinars, which we've just all cited a number of them, and registered with all of our groups and be a part of all of these coalitions. But I don't think that being outside of the Beltway or DC area should at all be in any way a barrier to full participation in the community. And we are eager to come to you and be in your backyard also for in-person gatherings to the degree that people are wanting to be a part of them.
Couldn't agree more. And specifically to the issue of more complex drug development. Drug development is really complex, and figuring out how, as a patient, to effectively engage. We know that is very challenging. So NORD actually has a grant from the FDA to create educational materials really specific to breaking down the complex issue of drug development for patients. So it's a 2-year project. We hopefully will be releasing the first batch of instructional videos and one-pagers, and really our education department worked really hard over the last year to put together a very comprehensive curriculum and really comprehensive content that is bite-sized, that is really trying to bring patients up from building a foundation of what is FDA and how does a drug come to market, all the way to the complex issues of accelerated approval and patient-focused drug development meetings and all the nitty-gritty details. So stay tuned for the release of the first couple of modules, as I said, hopefully in the next few months. I also know that to promote our NORD Congress in October, we have a whole track dedicated to FDA drug development, focusing on things like repurposing. So we'll definitely love to stay in touch on this. Again, a lot of the focus on when we developed the programming for the summit was really because we see that gap in bringing patient groups that are new to drug development up to speed and giving them practical tools for how to really dive in on these complex issues. I'll put my contact info in the chat. Happy to reconnect.
Yeah.
And Michelle, if I can then just add to that, I agree that being out of DC is 99% a non-issue now. But in addition to everything that's already been suggested, the Food and Drug Law Institute has a drug law and regulation introduction course designed specifically for patient organizations. I'll call out BIO has been a sponsor of it for years, and Annie has been on the planning committee of it for years. It is not focused on advocacy training, although Annie, you probably could speak to this better than I at this point, advocacy training, but more really understanding the law and regulations under which FDA functions. So, but it's an excellent course. It's been going on for years, and now, Annie, I believe it's either 100% virtual or mostly virtual.
It's mostly virtual, and our RDLA We're Giving program provides stipends to patients to participate as well. So there shouldn't be a participation barrier at all for the community.
Actually, yes, yeah, Every Life has been very generous with basically buying seats in the course, right? So that anyone who wants to participate can. And also, of course, BIO itself has a lot of materials. To the extent your question is about sickle cell disease more specifically, I'm not involved with it, but the Sickle Cell Disease Coalition that is run by my colleagues at Levitt, feel free to look at that website and see if there's anything valuable there, or again, reach out to me in my emails in the chat, and I'd be happy to put you in touch with the right people.
Excellent. And download the document that Jesse put in the chat at the beginning. It has the bio sketches and email addresses for our amazing speakers. Thank you all so much for joining. We are at time, but just want to just let you all know how wonderful this conversation has been. Thank you so much, Karen, Amy, and Annie for joining us. and Danielle in absentia, but thanks for being part of the conversation. And also Emma, for your colleagues, feel free to send them the invitations to our coffee chats, because it's another way to network and get to know fellow patient advocates. So I hope you all have a wonderful day, stay in the air conditioning, and we will chat next time. Thanks.
Bye, thank you.